Good evening, good morning, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody. I'm Brenda Bassi, a veterinarian specialized in public health and also part of the One Health Social Small Working Group. We're working on the food security, food safety, and the social sciences. So today we are hosting our first webinar, which titled with food security and gender equity. Today, also, our webinar is hosting three special professors. Two of them are from France. The first session of our webinar will be hosted by Professor Julie Garnier, and she will present gender responsive One Health in food system at triple whammy. A brief introduction about Professor Julie Garnier. She is a deducted professor in One Health, Biodiversity and Gender. Also, she's also gender expert and practitioner with more than 25 years experience in holistic conservation and development programs in the most threatened ecosystem of the planet, with and for local and indigenous communities. Also, as a pioneer in a community-based One Health, she developed a gender-responsive and rights-based on One Health approach for integrating sustainable development and conservative. She worked in the most endangered species and ecosystems, spanning from black rhinoceros to coral reefs, with some of the most vulnerable communities, developing programs now held as a model for sustainability in Africa. She is a founding member of the network of European EcoHealth and One Health, where she leads the Gender, Biodiversity and One Health Working Group. She co-founded the Odyssey Conservation Trust with a small group of experienced conservationists and One Health practitioners to promote gender-responsive One Health at all levels of societies, and develops One Health programs with universities, funding agencies, and international institutions. She co-founded One Health Maroc. Professor Julie also worked for 18 years with the Zoological Society of London and lived more than 20 years in Southern Africa. So the floor is yours, Professor Julie. Please, you can start your session. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Rhonda. Thanks a lot. Now, can you just let me know that you're seeing my screen and that I'm going to put it on the diaporama? Is that okay? Can you see well the screen?
Yes, we can see it.
Okay, so yes, as I think thank you very much for organizing this very important webinar on food security and gender equity. I think we're all now seeing how the crisis is amplifying and affecting all levels of society, all countries, and gender is absolutely critical and pivotal in food systems. So a triple win. Why a triple win? Because actually implementing and deploying a gender-responsive One Health in food systems will allow to have a win-win situation for biodiversity, for climate change, for health, and for equity. So actually it's more than a triple win, it's a quadruple win. And I will just sort of remind you how food insecurity is now a global and ever increasing problem. Are you seeing the second slide? Are you with me on the second slide? Yes? Okay.
Yes.
We just had a problem previously, so I just wanted to make sure this was okay. Yes, we have about 3 billion people now unable to afford a healthy diet, and food insecurity is affecting about 18% of the world population. We define a person as being food insecure when he lacks regular access to enough safe and nutritious food for normal growth and development, and an active and healthy life. And you've got severe, food insecurity when people run out of food, goes for an entire day without eating at certain times of the year. And what we can see is that food security, whether severe or moderate, is increasing all around the world. You have on the light green and light orange moderate or severe food insecurity. And you can see that it's really increasing around the world, especially in Africa. And the upper graphs are women food insecurity, and the graphs below are men food insecurity. And we can see that there is a gender gap in all countries, especially in Latin America. We can also see that gender gap is about 10%. So food insecurity is generally 10% higher in women than men. So food insecurity is a gender issue. And we can also see that food insecurity is seriously prevalent in Africa. So it's a global problem and an ever-increasing problem, as we are seeing with the war now that has started not only in Europe, but that has also been affecting a number of countries for a number of years. And it's a gender issue. Malnutrition and food insecurity are a gender issue, which is now recognized by the use of a specific indicator, for example. If you look at target 2, SDG 2, which is to end hunger, and target 2.2 and all forms of malnutrition, well, the definition of that target is to end all forms of malnutrition, including targets on stunting and wasting in children under 5 years of age, and address the nutritional needs of adolescent girls, pregnant and lactating women. And I think this in itself, by having a specific indicator, which is indicator 2.223, prevalence of anemia in women, is a recognition finally that yes, food insecurity and malnutrition are affecting differently women and men. And it is absolutely staggering to see that indicator for which the target is to have 50% reduction in anemia in women of reproductive age is actually stagnating and huge. We have globally nearly 1 in 3 women of reproductive age globally affected by anemia. And more alarmingly, there has been no progress since 2012. So I think we're very far from the targets, all the targets. And actually there you've got huge differences. Obviously this is different in Europe and in Africa. In some countries in Western Africa, you nearly have 60%, 58% of women of reproductive age being affected by anemia. And why is this all important? I'm concentrating on that indicator to start with because this has huge repercussion. Anemia is a reflection of poverty and malnutrition, and it perpetuates poverty cycles throughout generations. This is not such a complicated graph, but what's important is that anemia during pregnancy increases the risk of perinatal and maternal mortality, and this is going to produce low birth weight infants, which are going to be affected potentially by impaired mental development and frequent infection, poor health, and reduced mental capacity, which is going to lead to poor education and poor economic outcome. And this is going to perpetuate the poverty cycles in which women which are subject to food insecurity, malnutrition, anemia are going to perpetuate this cycle. And I think this is really important because girls affected by poor growth, both in fetal and early life, will then, at the following generation, produce low birth weight babies. So that's the perpetuation of the cycles. Alternatively, overweight during pregnancy is also going to increase the risk of a child becoming obese or overweight later on in life. So this is, again, perpetuation of malnutrition. But what's also important later on in life. The proportion of adults with anemia are also going to be higher in women, simply because also menstruation is going to affect the anemic condition. And obviously, you have the gender drivers, gender-associated drivers, which I'm going to talk about later on, which are going to also perpetuate poverty cycles and food insecurity. So gender is both a driver and a result of food insecurity. Now, what we see is that women play critical roles in food production systems, and we have to consider food systems as a whole. They've got huge responsibilities at all levels of the food value chains. We estimate they're responsible for about 48%. They represent 48% of the agricultural labor force, but actually it's probably a lot more, especially in communities where men are migrating, but we're also seeing different situations depending on the political situation. Now, women also have an incredible responsibility in plant biodiversity, and I'll talk a bit more about that later on. They manage small domestic animals, which is also expose them to specific risks, such as health risks and zoonotic diseases risks. And obviously, they're also responsible for food preparation, cooking, collecting water and timber, and preparing meat, which again expose them to more risks of zoonotic diseases, waterborne diseases, but also when collecting water and timber, which is their responsibility. And that's just for cooking. They are going to be exposed to risks of gender-based violence. And they also, despite these huge responsibilities, they face incredible discrimination and segregation in accessing reproductive resources and land tenure. Land tenure is becoming a very big issue in food systems and food security. Again, I'll talk a bit more later on. And another big obstacle is representation in local institutions and governance mechanisms. Women are simply not there in decision-making structures. So they have a huge role, and their responsibilities are underestimated, are not recognized, and in addition to that, they lack access to all the assets and elements that could reduce this discrimination. So persistent gender inequalities undermine food security. Again, this is just to emphasize the fact that there are huge gaps in agriculture. Yes, we discussed how women have got huge underrepresentation in accessing rural resources, services, labor market opportunities. Their roles and contributions are undervalued. Gender policies are not addressing, there are no gender policies or gender-based policies, or very little gender-based policies in food systems. And more importantly, we lack gender-specific data in most cases. We've seen it in health and zoonotic diseases, but in agriculture also we desperately need to have more specific data. And there's been studies showing how closing the gender gap would allow to eliminate the yield gaps of production by 20-30% among men and women. It's been estimated that FAO study has been produced a few years ago, but it estimated that by closing that gender gap, we could field about 100 million people more, which is absolutely massive. So there is an urgent need to transform food systems because they're so inequitable, and also because they have not been able to solve the food crisis. And in addition, food systems are not sustainable nor functional. They've got huge impacts. Now we know about it on biodiversity, on equity, and climate change, because globally, they contribute to 25% of all greenhouse gases emissions. They use about 70% of fresh water. They account for 70% of child labor, and they account for 73% and probably more of tropical deforestation. They are a huge drivers of biodiversity loss, which is so important because biodiversity is key to reducing malnutrition and improving food security. I'll just go to the land use change and food systems as a driver of the biodiversity crisis, which again is so important because it shows us how everything is connected. And we know all these, all these extinctions and threats to mammals, wild mammals, and all species on Earth now, with about 1 million of species being at risk today of extinction, which is absolutely massive. But when you see the direct drivers for terrestrial, freshwater, or marine resources, well, land use change associated with agriculture for the most part is the most important driver, about 30% up to 40%. So there is no doubt that in order to address food security, reduce food insecurity, we need a One Health approach. Because when we look at all these drivers, we see how interconnected they are. They impact in dark blue are the most prominent driver, the most important drivers in food systems. And actually one driver here is missing hugely, and that's gender, which should have a set aside place, really. And we can see how all these drivers impact all aspects of food systems, from the food production systems to the supply chain to the consumer behavior. And this is going to, in turn, affect diet and nutrition and health. And obviously, this is impacted by policy and governance. And you have this cycle of food security, which is then going to also fuel biodiversity loss and the biodiversity crisis and climate change and conflict. We all know how conflict is fueled by food insecurity and the food crisis. And an important aspect of gender equity and food security is through biodiversity. This is an aspect that is becoming more and more researched now. And there's been an interesting, when we look at plant biodiversity, we know there's been about 250,000 plant species identified throughout the ages, and about 7,000 crops, 7,000 plant species have been used throughout ages for food by humans. But now we know that rice, maize, and wheat provide more than 50% of the world calories. So there's been a huge reduction in plant biodiversity, which is affecting nutrition. And there is now a movement really to reverse these trends. And this has to be linked and associated to women, simply because women hold the knowledge for which plants are edible, which plants are going to be resistant to disease or to certain climate events. They are seed custodians. They manage biodiversity, and this is an aspect that is that was not researched before, simply because mainly men were involved in research. But little by little, as more women became engaged in researching food security, then women from local communities gave them access to their knowledge. And there is now, for example, a successful program in Madagascar which is looking at rehabilitating yam, for which you've got about 40 species in Madagascar. And they're extremely rich in protein, in minerals, in starch, And women have the knowledge about all these plans. So again, empowering women to transmit their knowledge and to use their incredible knowledge about biodiversity and food security is key in addressing the crisis. So gender responsive One Health for breaking poverty cycles and food insecurity. Yes, because as we said, malnutrition in women is going to be perpetuating poverty cycles through poor health and poor nutrition, unequal access to education, the burden of unpaid care work, the burden of domestic activities, and also their unequal access to healthcare, which is so dramatic in local and remote communities, and also poor access to economic opportunities and land tenure. And what we are suggesting is by deploying gender responsive One Health, we can break this poverty cycle by empowering women to protect biodiversity and conserve natural resources and passing on their traditional environmental knowledge, by accessing land tenure, credit and technology, by accessing drinking water and clean energy, accessing health services, economic opportunities, and decision making. These are key elements in addressing the food security crisis and using a gender responsive One Health lens. So if we just look at the agriculture sector and food systems, we can really, we need to promote programs which are going to boost gender equality. We really need to boost programs which are going to promote land ownership with women. In developing countries, only 13% of women hold land rights. So that is absolutely a dramatic situation and is recognized as being critical now for food security. We need in food production systems and women, we need to improve control over their income by deploying a gender responsive One Health. We need to help them to access training, technologies, information, digital data, financial services, and accessing markets and trade platforms, and women investment, access to financial services. But also we need to look at education policies and employment policies, which need to be more gender sensitive. And that goes to food governance systems, simply having a more gender transformative approach. So we will only develop food security strategies if the gender gap is closed in food governance systems and deployed at all levels. Just a few examples of nature-based solutions for agriculture, biodiversity, and women, and how it's all linked. Well, there are a few nature-based solutions, such as restoring degraded rangeland, or improved home gardens, or on-farm tree planting, or composting. But when you deploy this nature-based solution, you need to really look at the impact it's going to have on women. And women access, for example, for restoring degraded rangeland, you will need a huge amount of land compared to activities such as composting. And you need also to look at the time which is going to be necessary until benefits are realized, because women quite often need to feed the kids in the evening. That's a phrase which I have so often heard with women I'm still working with. At the end of the day, the priority is to feed the kids at night. So just to say, when you're deploying different solution, a nature-based solution, which is now something that is more and more recognized as being beneficial, you need to have a gender-sensitive and transformative approach. And there's been a recent study which is really interesting in showing that if more biodiversity is integrated into agricultural land, well, not only can we have healthy diets for most of the population, but that would allow to sequester up to 30% of the total carbon dioxide that is released into the atmosphere. So again, we can only improve food security, the biodiversity crisis, the equity crisis, the health crisis, if we have a holistic approach and a gender responsive approach. And I'm just referring to a paper that we've published recently, which is showing how deploying a gender responsive One Health can help to heal nature and ourselves. And I invite you to have a look at this paper if you want more detail. But what's really important is that in order to deploy this gender responsive One Health, we first need to change our vision, of our relationship with nature. We need to recognize that we're an element of nature and we need nature to survive. And in that, we can learn a lot from indigenous and local communities for which nature is an integral part of their life. Actually, they are part of nature. They recognize it. They have a lot of different names for their being part of nature and that sense of oneness. And in a way, what the message I would like to pass on is that we don't need to reinvent, the world. We just need to learn a lot from more traditional societies who have kept incredible, who have kept their biodiversity and who have respected their biodiversity, nature. We can learn a lot from them. And at the same time, we really need to deploy gender responsive and transformative approach in policy making, in businesses, in civil society. So this is just a more holistic vision of things, and this will allow in turn to, yes, conserve biodiversity, adapt to climate change, reduce risks of pandemic, and improve food security. So thank you very much for your attention.
Actually, thank you so much, Professor Julie. And I apologize at the end of your presentation. I just clicked for Professor Brigitte to be the presenter, so I apologize to you. So I was just checking that everything is okay, but that was so nice. Also, we took a lot of photos for you while you were presenting it, so we will also share that via our social media channels. Thank you so much. We would like to ask any of the attendees if they have any questions to Professor Julie. Please, the floor is for the questions right now. Actually, Professor, I have a question for you. I noticed that most of the projects are just focusing on Africa and South Africa, let's say, in Africa in general. But what about the countries here in the Levant area? Even the women here in our countries, they have that kind of instinct that they can use they have that instinct to create. To work with the biodiversity, and at the same time, they keep. I can't describe it, but the same idea as what happens in Africa. So I'm totally surprised that why there's no enough projects here in our countries, in the Levant area, let's say, and Levant, which means Lebanon, Syria, Jordan, Iraq. Why there's no that much focus on that? On those countries?
well, I think we need people to promote these approaches and to maybe show how impactful they can be. But, you know, this is a general approach, and this has to be obviously adapted to each specific context and socio-cultural context of the country. So I think in order to deploy this gender transformative One Health or responsive One Health approach, you really need to have to look at the drivers, the socio-cultural and socio-economic drivers of the problem you're addressing, and then, you know, address them as well. And obviously each country is going to have a different context, and I think you have to be respectful of the socio-cultural context while trying to improve things as well. So I think, you know, it's a matter of also awareness, and through a group like the one you've created, I think there is scope for really raising awareness on what can be done, and promoting and exchanging ideas and examples of successes which have worked in other countries. So the principles are the same, but they have to be really adapted to the local context. So I think we just need to have more people like you to start projects like this, and there are also broader organizations which are interested in doing that.
Hey, I hope so. Thank you so much, Professor, for your answer. And please, if anyone has any question, we will share, after your permission, Professor, we will share your email address. So if anyone has any questions, they can share it with you. Is that okay with you?
Absolutely. I'll be delighted. Thank you.
Great, you're welcome. So now we will introduce for another time Professor Brigitte Bagnol. So hello, Professor. Bonsoir. I guess that I don't know if I'm the only one who can't hear her. I can't hear you, Professor.
Sorry. I'm asking you to give me access so I can share my screen, please.
Yes, you are right now the presenter.
Thank you.
Yeah. So we would like to introduce you, Professor Brigitte Bagnol right now. So welcome, Professor, to our webinar. Professor Brigitte Bagnol, I guess that your title is about food security and gender, but first, a brief introduction about yourself. Professor Brigitte has over 35 years of experience in Southern African region. She's living in Mozambique and South Africa as an anthropologist specializing in development, anthropology of ecology, communication, sexuality, anthropology of health, One Health, and nutrition with a gender lens. She's an independent consultant working in Africa and Asia for different national and international agencies. So she's an independent consultant working in Africa and Asia for different national and international agencies to give training, design, or evaluate projects. And they conduct research since 1993. She currently works mainly on gender, nutrition, and infectious diseases in a One Health perspective. She carried out gender analysis and developed gender strategies both for grassroots projects as well as at ministry level in the agriculture, education, and health sector. She has a lot of experience in violence against women and children and on HIV issues, especially with young girls and adolescents. She has been working since 1993 on controlling Newcastle disease in chicken, and later on avian influenza. She was co-script and co-director on several documentaries and fiction films. She developed country-level communication strategies to tackle avian flu, in addition to the where I can't scroll down, in addition to other projects. So, welcome, Professor Brigitte, to our webinar, and now the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. So I'm going to present on gender and food and nutrition security. First, I'm going to introduce you the definition. Usually when we speak about food security, We speak about the situation when all people at all time have physical and economic access to sufficient, safe and nutritious food to meet their dietary needs and food preference for a healthy life. So as you will see from the definition, it is possible to understand that several aspects need to be taken into consideration to have food security. You need to have the availability of food, you need to have access to food, and then you need to have a good utilization of food, and also some kind of stability. You need to have food every day and every month. And often all those aspects are not present in the household. We saw with the presentation of Julie just before that we have different forms of malnutrition. We have low birth weight, we have wasting, we have stunting, we have some micronutrient deficiency, we have also overweight and obesity, and we have diet-related non-communicable disease. And when we analyze the causes of this situation, we can identify several. One is household food insecurity. You can have also inadequate diet for the age and the situation of the different individuals in the household. You might have also an unhealthy environment. Even it can include the absence of safe water, inadequate health services, and gender inequality. So my presentation is going to concentrate mainly on the last one, on gender inequality. And I'm going to introduce you to 4 different aspects. First, the different role of men and women in relation to food production, food conservation, preparation, and human health. Second, the different nutritional needs of men and women during their life cycle and in relation to nutritional issues. Third, I'm going to introduce you to different nutritional problems faced by men and women. And fourth, I will discuss gender inequality, which are the cause and the consequence of malnutrition. So the first point is are the different roles in relation to food production, conservation, and preparation. We discussed with Julie that women are carrying out most of the agriculture work. They are also doing most of the food conservation, the food preparation, most of the water and sanitation activity, and most of the health care for children, adults, sick people, and elderly. So if we look at the situation of women and their role in relation to food production, preparation, and health, you see how important they are to understand the complexity of the system and how important gender will be in this context. Still in relation to the different role, we analyze different situations. We see a lot of heterogeneity within country and between country in relation to the work in agriculture. Also different kind of labor burden on rural women. Also we know that usually the burden of rural women exceeds the burden of men, and this is going to have an impact on their nutritional status. And we also know that female labor includes a higher proportion of unpaid work. So it is going to have an impact in relation to the access to food. So due to their different role, women are at the intersection of agriculture, of health and nutrition. So really women are at the center of this intersection. They have a very special place, but they need to share fully with men those responsibility, because often they are carrying the burden without having the means, the knowledge and the decision making to play this role adequately. Now we are going to see the second point, which are the different nutritional needs during the women and the men life cycle. We know that individuals at different periods of their life have different needs. There are physiological factors such as menstruation, pregnancy, and lactation that necessitate specific nutritional requirement, and we saw earlier the issue of iron. Prematernal nutrition also is important because, as Julie explained to us, underweight before conception increases the likelihood of preterm delivery and to give birth to an underweight baby. In addition, many of birth abnormalities occur during the first week of gestation. So it's very important to have a good nutrition for girls even before they are pregnant. And we observe that there is a widespread nutrition deprivation among women that perpetuates the intergeneration cycle of nutrition deprivation in children. And as I said earlier, women are given the responsibility, but they are not given the means, the decision making, the economic power, the knowledge to ensure an optimal nutrition for themselves and for their children. And I will give you some more data later in relation to those specific topics. Still, again, now we are going to see the third aspect, which are different nutritional problems faced by men and women. So we saw that they have different roles. We saw they have different needs during the life cycle. And now we are looking at the different nutritional problems that they are facing. Globally, we consider that women are more vulnerable to obesity, anorexia, bulimia, anemia, and that overall the prevalence of undernutrition rate are similar between adult men and women, but it's also it depends. It needs to be taken carefully because in some community and in some region maybe there are differences, higher differences, wider differences. Undernutrition, overweight and obesity might be found in the same community and even in the same household. You might see household where the children is undernourished and one of an adult is with obesity and overweight. So the problem is extremely complex, and each situation, each individual might face a specific problem. So this graph introduce you to the worldwide gender disparity in relation to obesity. The columns that you see, the dark one are the male, and the gray are the female. You have Southeast Asia, Western Pacific, Africa, Europe, Middle East, America, and global. And you see that the situation varies a lot from geographical area to other geographic area. You see that in the America is where you have more obesity, and you have women with 29% of obesity, while men are only with 18%. And in Southeast Asia, it's contrarily a little higher prevalence in men, like in Europe, you have higher prevalence in men than in women. So you see, all those data need to be analyzed and looked at carefully, because there are a lot of differences between geographical area, but as we said, also between community and even within the same household. So this graph explains the connection between economic status, social discrimination, quality of life, mental health, and gender inequality. So we see that gender inequality has an impact on the environment, on the behavior, on biology. It has an impact on the energy expenditure and the energy intake, and is going to have an impact on overweight and obesity. And this also can have an impact on the economic status, discrimination, the quality of life, and even the mental health. So once again, we see that this can create also a vicious cycle with discrimination, bad quality of life might also increase gender inequality. Another graph, another set of data, very important data, which are the population coverage by anemia. Those are data from 2008, but uncover the period of 1993 to 2005. You see that pregnant women overall globally with anemia are 69%. Non-pregnant women are 73%, while men are 40%. Usually we see that pregnant women tend to have a higher prevalence of anemia, but it's not always true, because we see that in Western Pacific, non-pregnant women have a higher prevalence of anemia than pregnant women. So once again, the situation varies from region to region and need to be taken carefully. This graph is the burden of anemia and the underlying causes by country and territory. And in blue we see the men, and in red we see the women. So this is at a global level, is by age. So the first column is between 1 and 4 years of age, and then it's 5 to 9 and so on until 95 years old. And you see that on the first years of childhood, between 1 and 9 years old, you see the blue line, which are the boys. The burden of anemia is higher among the boys than among the girls. But then the situation changed completely. It's the inverse. You have the red bars that are higher than the blue one, meaning that the women, when they are between the age of 14 to the age of 54, have higher prevalence of anemia than men. And then later on, the discrepancy between men and women tend to be less important. So, as we see, men and women have a different nutritional problem, face different situation. The situation is complex and vary. And we saw that women have additional burden, which are the burden of giving birth and raising malnourished children, having the responsibility of the health of their children. And we saw that women will have a high problem with iron deficiency during their pregnancy, and this can contribute to maternal death and to the health of their children. In addition to the biological, the physiological aspect, we can also consider that there are gender issue related to cultural aspect, cultural bias, because often we saw in household that although women are the one who prepare the food, they are the one also who sacrifice themselves to give food to their children and to their male partner. So although they are responsible for food production, for food conservation, food preparation, they are often at disadvantage in relation to the consumption of food. As we spoke earlier about the tendency to devaluate local food, that also contributes to the loss of biodiversity, and with this correlates with the adoption of a Western food style and the devaluing of locally available nutritional food for consumption, for human consumption. Gender inequality are a cause and a consequence of malnutrition. Julie explained this very well to us because malnourished mother with limited access to adequate health care, reproductive health care, are at very increased risk of delivering undernourished baby. And this is going to limit the growth of the baby, their development, including their intellectual and physical development. So those children might be they might have less ability to study properly, and they might be physically less strong, with more possibility to have infection and undernutrition. And this will create the cycle of malnutrition. So it's what I was saying about the consequence of undernutrition. It's going to increase or affect negatively labor productivity, and then the ability to make a living, to earn a living, or to produce enough food for their consumption. Gender inequality in relation to this aspect can be seen with a high proportion of adolescents that have children at a young age. Although those data, the recent data indicate that the number of births by young female adolescents has decreased, is still quite high. And we know that teen pregnancy carry a lot of health risk, both for the baby and the mother, which include low birth weight, which is a problem for the reproduction of the cycle of malnutrition from the mother to the baby. So we saw the aspect related to physiology. We look at the aspect related to culture and the fact that women might have less food for themselves. But in some cases, we also observed that animal protein, by example, are given more easily to boys and to girls, at least in some of the countries where I've done research, like in Tanzania and in Mozambique. Culturally, it's accepted to, protein, animal protein are more valued for boys and men than for girls, which impact, of course, on their nutritional status. An analysis of the cycle and the cause and cause of malnutrition. This is a document produced by UNICEF. You see that gender factor, gender inequality, it's at the core here, at the middle. Inadequate access to food, inadequate care of children and women, insufficient health services, unhealthy environment. Those are at the center, because those are going to create disease, or are going to impact on the level of disease. They are going to impact on the dietary intake, which has a direct relation with malnutrition. And the underlying causes are access and control over resources. And we saw and we discussed the fact that women have very often not access and control to the resources. And as I said earlier, women don't have access to decision making. Often they do not have access to decision making, even in relation to their own health. Those data that I'm presenting now are from the DHS. Those data are from 2008, and they present the percentage of currently married women according to their decision-making pattern. So I took only the first 3 countries on the data set that I was studying. So this is Benin. So you see that possibility of women to decide on their own health care, 90%. Women, husband alone deciding on the women on health care, 60%. Decision in relation to large household purchase, women alone, 14%. Men alone, 61%. Household purchase for daily needs, women has 40% of the decision, while men have lower, 32%. Visit to family or friend, 17%. It means that 17% of the women who are currently married can on their own decide to visit their family or some of their friends, while the decision is taken in 45% of the case of the women, the decision is taken by the husband alone. So you see that in some countries, and once again, this is going to vary according to the region, vary from country to country and even within country, and also it's going to vary according to intersectionality, the factor related to intersectionality, like that age, class, status in society, if you are the first wife or the second wife, and so on. Another data in relation to gender inequality, those are data in relation to education. These in blue are the boys and in orange are the women. Those are number of out-of-school population among children from 2000 to 2018. So you see that the number of out-of-school population is going down, although the percentage or the proportion of girls out of school is going down less quickly, let's say. So those are inequality, and we will see that education is also has a very important influence on nutrition and food security in the household and the nutritional status of the children. Julie was speaking about land ownership. Those are data about men and women land ownership in different countries of Africa, even Peru, India, Cambodia. So the first in Niger, Burkina Faso, Nigeria, Uganda, Malawi, Tanzania, Ethiopia, Peru, India, and Cambodia. So the pink are the men and the red are the women. We see that in all countries except Malawi, the men have a higher percentage, represent a higher percentage of owner of the land. So this confirm what the data that Julie was presenting earlier. Women do not have access to decision making. They do not have access to land, so they are in difficulty even to control their own food intake and the food intake of their children, of course. In relation to decision making, again, a very, very recent document from called Food System 50/50 that was published this year, to analyze the situation of international organization working on food internationally. And 34% of those organizations were in green, meaning that at senior management, they had between 45 and 55% of women. So only 34%, meaning 1/3 of the organization, had nearly parity, let's say parity in terms of gender among the senior management of their organization, while the two-thirds had not achieve parity. And this situation has implication at the level of policies, existence of policy in their organization related to gender, and it has also an influence in terms of the benefits that women will receive from extension. Okay, so we use those data. Looking at the fact that 5% that female farmers receive only 5% of all the agricultural extension services, that only 15% of the world extension agents are women, and only 10% of the total of the for the agriculture, forestry, and fishing investment goes to women. And as a consequences, the yield that women are getting from their field is lower than the yield that men are achieving. And one of the objectives in agriculture to try to improve food security, it's to try to balance this gap, to reduce this gap, to allow women to produce more and thus to reduce the number of malnourished people in the world. And to conclude, some recommendation on ways to reduce gender inequality. As we saw, gender inequality are a cause and the consequence of the food insecurity. So one of the objectives and one of the recommendations is to empower women by all means and reduce gender inequality at all levels in relation to education, in relation to access to land, access to extension services, access to new technology or information. Educate women as much as possible, as they are less likely to have undernourished children. And usually we have data showing that educated women tend to have their first child a little bit later than women who are less educated. Female employment also is considered to have a positive impact on the health and the nutritional status of the children. So reducing inequality might improve the nutritional status of the household and the children. It's very important while empowering women to give more responsibility to men in relation to the household nutritional and health issue. We know that a lot of men do not have information. They are not involved, even in the health center. They are not welcome. So it's very important to share with them information and to try to give them a responsibility also, to share the responsibility with the women. We know that reducing poverty is not enough to address the nutritional deficiency. Allowing people to earn a salary also, because biodiversity, the quality of the food that the household is eating is very important. And sometimes when people stop producing their own food, they start having a very limited diet with very, very limited diversity. In relation to girls and women health, it's very important not to consider only the 1,000 days window, but as we saw, it's very important to consider the health and the nutrition of the girls before they are pregnant, because a lot of problem can happen in the first week of pregnancy. Another recommendation is to address all those issues in a very holistic manner, because there is no quick fix. It's a very multi-sectoral approach by definition, because it includes gender issue, it includes childcare, it includes health, it includes water and sanitation, and it's necessary to look at the whole food chain. Last slide and last recommendation. It's also necessary to inform, educate, to improve dietary habits, not only at individual level but at societal level. It's necessary to develop nutrition awareness for consumer, to value adequate food. Also important to value the local knowledge and to value biodiversity. It's also very important to work with the private sector, with food industry, and the consumer organization to reduce salt, saturated fat, sugar, and also to draw very clear recommendation in relation to the needs of different people in the different phases of their life cycle, and according to the different specific condition that they have, because we saw that men and women and people of different age face different problems. So with this slide, I'm going to end my presentation, and I thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you so much, Professor Brigitte, for this nice presentation. Actually, we have received 2 emails from 2 academic institutes. They have asked about the presentation, if they are going to be recorded, because they want to share it in the summer school this year. So we would like to inform the presenters that this recording is going to be shared with other academic institutes. And in case if any of the attendees there want to ask any question, we will share your emails with them, okay?
Yes, thank you. It's a pleasure.
So we'd like to ask the attendees if they have any questions to Professor Brigitte. before moving on to the last presentation, which is going to be to Professor Cediel, and the presentation is recorded because she couldn't attend with us today. She has apologized for some circumstances. So the floor right now to our partner in this small group, Malik. Malik, the floor is yours. How are you? So I'm going to introduce Professor Cediel. Till Malik prepare her presentation and share it with us. So Professor Natalia Cediel Becerra, her title is going to be about complex system of gender equity and food security. As we mentioned that we're going to present the record of the presentation. Professor Natalia has been a consultant for the Gender and the Reconciliation International for the last 12 years in Colombia. She has 14 years of experience working in multidisciplinary health teams and intercultural workplaces on public health. Her current academic work is focused on gender-based One Health, the implementation of a One Health approach for rabies programs in Colombia and Latin America. Currently, she is a professor and researcher at La Salle University, Colombia. She has several publications on gender equity, health and social inequalities of Colombian rural populations, and the 2030 Agenda on Sustainable Development. She belongs to the cited network of One Health and Climate Change. Since 2021, Dr. Natalia serves at the One Health high-level expert panel with the Tripartite and the UNEP aliens. So now we will present her presentation. Just a minute, let me check with, and we will stop recording right now because we will share the record of her presentation with the presenters and attendees. Thank you so much.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. I'm going to share about the complex systems of gender equity and food security. Thank you to the ISOHA group for inviting me to this webinar. I would like to start saying that the definition of what a food system implies the complexity of combination and relationships and dynamics among the environmental, social, political, and economical drivers on the different parts of the food chain, which means those are influencing not only food production, but also food processing, food distribution, and food consumption. And all the gender studies, all the gender analysis is part of those drivers and is part of the food chain. So we are going to try to interact and study and explain both in a simple way, so concepts that are very complex. But in order to understand, we're going to start defining that food security has been described with four dimensions. The first one is the food availability, that is related to the sufficient quantity of appropriate food availability and is influenced by the domestic production of food, the import capacity of the country, the food stocks, and the food aids that can be available for a community or for a country. The second dimension is the access, that is related to the physical and economical aspects, access to food, which means that is related or is influenced by the purchasing power of people, by the income of population, transport and market infrastructure. Another important dimension is the utilization, that is related to the adequate dietary intake and the ability to use nutrients in the body. This dimension is influenced by food safety, bad hygiene practices, bad manufacturing practices, bad the diet quality and diversity, and also the macro and micronutrients in the diet. And the last dimension is related to stability, which means that, as its name is clear, the stability of supply and access of food. This dimension is influenced by the weather, bad climate, bad price fluctuations, bad political factors and economical factors. And in all of those dimensions, women are part of the picture. No, not only because women are producers, food producers, but also women are workers that can pay for food, that has in some way purchasing power in a less or higher degree. They are in charge of selecting and choosing the diet of their families. They are the ones that are cooking. They are the ones that are looking for the people that are sick in their families. That is called the care economy. They are the main in charge of taking care of children, of the old people in the house, the older people in the house. So all those activities are influenced by gender. Now we're going to see how when we are food insecure, when a family or a person is food insecure, or when we have food insecurity. So this happens when we have a lack of consistent access to enough food for every person in a household to live an active and healthy life. So this is directly related to the access. So as you can imagine, it's influenced by how people can afford or not food. Obviously, this can be a temporary situation, but also it can last a longer time and with different consequences on the people's health. What causes food insecurity? As I told you, poverty, unemployment, low income, the lack of affordable housing, chronic health conditions, or lack of access to healthcare, systemic racism and racial discrimination. And we have been in Colombia, the country where I live, we have been studying the causes of food insecurity in rural settings. And we have noticing that land ownership, access and control are the most important drivers for equal distribution of resources and opportunities, and also the most important drivers for food security. So one of the findings that we have already, that we know already, is that the war and the political situation that Colombia has had during the last 50 years has influenced the role and the situation of women, the rural women. Especially the gaps or inequalities that rural women face are distributed in 5 specific dimensions. We don't have official data on their conditions. We have a census. We have a census in 2015 that starts explaining some of the conditions of rural women, but we still need more information segregated by gender. The second gap is the unpaid work. No access to clean water, no access to energy, no access to sanitation services means that the women needs to be dedicated more time to those activities than men. And this work is not paid or recognized or valued. The third dimension, or the third gap, is that they have lower opportunities of education, as they are working for family to take care of the family, they are not allowed, or they don't feel they have the right to study or the right to have access to education. So this is an important barrier. A fourth barrier is that they don't have access to land as much as men have. They don't have access so easily to credit, to technical assistance and production assets. And finally, the policies on rural development are favoring agribusiness, blocking women develop family agriculture practices. The monoculture is taking place in the most part of the country, so those kind of agricultural practices are not what they do. They are more towards the family agriculture, and these are not supported in a huge way by the government. So in this way, there are many documents and reports that are explaining the advantages of gender equality as important contribution to the country economic growth. So if a country or a community has or improve the productivity for women, we can have increased domestic agricultural output by almost 4%. And what is most important is that we can have 10 million fewer people living in hunger. If we have access, if we give women access to land, we can have less people dying of hunger. So this is very important for the achievement of sustainable development goals, but also it's a moral topic. It's important that as they are growing the food that are going to be consumed in the cities and in the rural places, we need to assure that they have equal access, equal opportunities to grow in society. So there are many gender indexes described in literature. We have Gender Equality Index, Gender Development Index, World Economic Forum Global Gender Gap. I know specifically the Women's Empowerment in Agriculture Index. This is very interesting index that we have been applying this in the rural settings, interviewing women. We have done qualitative research on these 5 dimensions. As you can see, they are very different. They go from understanding if the women are autonomous in production, if they have production decision in an autonomous way, if they have the power to take decisions around access to land, water, fertilizers, and seeds. The second dimension is related to access to and decision-making power over unproductive resources. So we access if they have asset ownership, if they purchase, if they sell or transfer of assets, or access to and decisions to credit. And the third one is the control over use of income, if they do that decision of how to use their income by themselves or together with their husband, or if they don't absolutely choose anything about their income. So this is important. How they expend that income is very important. The fourth dimension talks about the leadership roles within community, if they belong to group memberships, if they are comfortable speaking in public. And this dimension is very interesting. Most of women are not comfortable speaking in public, but they probably are belonging to memberships, to groups or an organization of women in their towns or in their communities. And the last one is the dimension that we have seen less women accomplished, that is related to time allocation. that is a balance between the workload and the leisure time. So the framework of the women's empowerment in agriculture explain that if we achieve better results in these in these 5 dimensions, we can have improved agricultural productivity and increase outcomes, which means that we can have better food security index, are also not only related to food security, also we can have better education opportunities, better self-esteem in women, better social mobilization around important topics for their welfare, and also partnership skills. The literature has proved that the more a woman has these capacities, these abilities, better are their partnership skills with their husbands. And at the end, we can have better and a more clear achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals that you can see all of them: the gender equality, obviously, clean water and sanitation, sustainable cities and communities, responsible production and consumption are the main ones. These are the specific indicators on the 5 dimensions. In the study that we have done in previous years, we found that these women, when they achieve most of the dimensions of empowerment, they are leaders. They run progress. They run opportunities for their families and for their communities in many ways. Most of them are entrepreneurs. Others are healers. Other working as activism. Other are in charge of natural resources and protection of children, and most of them were very valued in their communities. So they are examples of how empowerment can have better results for development, but specifically for improving the food security in their families and their communities. So these are the main results of the study that we have published in 2017. We are now improving the methodology, and we are trying to integrate men in this conversation. So I'm going to share with you some of the interest that we are going to start in these communities, but including men in the empowerment conversation. So I'm going to share with you this measure that has been developed by the World Food Program. This measure is called Gender Equality for Food Security. You have the initials here in the title. And this measure is an instrument that looks at the interconnectedness of disempowerment and food insecurity. So this is composed by 18 questions, 10 related to food insecurity experience scale, and 8 related to gender equality component. But all of them can be segregated, and all these questions can be placed in 5 different dimensions. The first dimension is the decision-making ability, that is very similar to the previous index that I just explained. The second is the financial self-sufficiency. The third dimension is about freedom from violence. The fourth dimension is the reproductive freedom. And the 5th dimension is unpaid labor. So if you want to learn more about this measure, you can access the name of the measure. There's Gender Equality for Food Security, and you can find a whole report published in 2021, explaining how they measure all the questions. This is very interesting. But also, if you want to see a video, you can have access here. They make a pilot study in 17 countries, looking for understanding and validating this measure. And as you can see, there are countries that shows a huge gap among men and women. Men is red and women is blue, like Egypt and Bangladesh. The difference among men and women are very, very big, very great. And there are other countries like, for example, Lesotho, for example, Venezuela, United Kingdom, for example, that the difference between men and women in empowerment scores are very similar. But I'm going to share with you the video explaining the differences
in determining empowerment. But age, education, and location do matter for empowerment, although differently in different countries. Age was more significant for men in Kyrgyzstan, but for women in Egypt and Nicaragua.
Let's see.
In some countries, the levels of empowerment increase with age, while in others, changes in levels of empowerment
are not linear with age.
I'm going to show again the video, the part of the video that I'm interested in.
But in some countries, like Bangladesh and Zambia, education...
I'm not sure if I'm sharing right now, so I prefer that you can have access of this video afterwards.
For women than for men. In several countries, the levels of...
So I prefer that as I'm recording this this talk, and I'm not sure if this is the video is sharing, I prefer that you look for this website and take a look on this measure. It's very interesting because we can see that there are a lot of variables like age, education, if it's rural or if it's urban, the location of the people. There are many interesting correlationships on the empowerment aspects. And I want to end saying that it's important to measure those indicators, now the empowerment or gender equality, but also food security. But if we are a step beyond indicators, we need to work on multidisciplinary teams to achieve these outcomes that we want to achieve. And that's the importance of the One Health approach, that as we are in need of working multidisciplinary, multi-sectoral challenges, we need to solve those challenges with multi-sectoral solutions. So we cannot solve the problems that we have in health, in education, in sanitation and water access, in climate crisis. We cannot achieve specific goals reducing poverty if we don't address first the complexities of these conditions, the condition of gender and the condition of food security. So the conclusions for this short talk is that practical measures to work towards greater equality include livelihood support for women and girls, reducing women's workloads, ensuring protection from gender-based violence, and equitable access to resources and services. Another important conclusion is that food and nutrition interventions with a specific focus on gender equality are more effective and will more likely to build resilience to conflict, especially in countries, low and middle income countries. And also, finally, transforming gender relations need the conjoint effort to work with men and women, as patriarchy affects both of them. Not only women, but also men. So thank you very much for listening. And I'm sorry that I couldn't be able to be present at the time of the webinar. But if you need to understand, if you want to learn more about what I just shared, you can write me to this address. Thank you very much.